So we have quite a few practitioners and will be practitioners here. So what sort of skills are people in the GLAM sector going to need to do the work you do? And you've kind of hinted at it through your sessions, but they're things you would call out. Does that question make sense? Mm-hmm. Who wants to go first?
We're all looking at
Joanna.
You go first. That's a good question. Well, I think because, as I said before, it is a bit of a collaborative process. But for me personally, it's a lot about convincing people to go a certain way. So negotiation skills have been important. Some technical experience, definitely. I know a lot of organisations expect scripting skills for librarians now, which is,
Like coding skills or the writing of scripts?
No, like Python scripting skills. I know when I went to the US a couple of years ago, they were saying they were building that into a lot of their recruitment. It would come in handy. I mean, I've got Matt, who I work with, he's got those skills. So if you can, bringing out the different strengths in each other, I think. But for me, it's been a big change-making role. So being able to understand enough technically to talk to the tech people and then reiterate that to the lay people, and being able to speak both languages, managing the expectations of the non-technical people and vice versa. So I've often been, sitting in between IT and curators and calming them both down.
And it's the same for me a lot of the time, especially sort of early days of advocating. I've got that really horrible example of like Intel chip before Mac went, when Mac was DOS. So you've got, the guys over here, you got PC here, you got DOS over here, and before the Intel chip it was just like no compute. But in a traditional sense of conservation, so it's expected that conservators have a master's in conservation now, and that's sort of international. However, with time-based art, like I've said, that there's no traditional training within conservation. And in Australia, I think that is a big skill gap area that needs to be filled, because we're very much on the precipice of losing important 20th century Australian time-based artworks. We know that, there are institutions in the UK, in Europe, in the US that have time-based art conservators. NYU started their first program this year, and I was invited to talk at their sort of symposium where everyone gathered from around the world who works in this area and said, where is the skills? What are we lacking? And their approach is really to focus within traditional conservation and give two people 24 different instructors, because they can do it because it's New York, and just really delve in, where I don't think that's going to be the Australian model. I know we need more of me, and I would so love it if we had a bunch of us who sort of worked in this area. But I think, and as I was sort of saying earlier, maybe the answer is not traditional conservation. Maybe it's teaching IT specialists conservation ethics rather than getting conservators to learn hardcore technical skills.
It's interesting because I think where I am as the fact that there is even a role called digital curation specialist, when I was starting out, I just happened to be the person at the National Film and Sound Archive. They went, you've got a few technical skills, why don't you do that? And it's similar to where you are now, where now people can actually study digital curation. They can study, you can go and learn about digital preservation. You can do a course in AV preservation now, and it has the digital part. Like when I did it, it didn't actually have the digital part. So I think it's coming, but you're a trailblazer in that way, that where I was in that situation before, where it's nice to see people are actually studying and there's an option for them to study. It'll have to come. It has
to, but also we then have to communicate to institutions. Like I've been trying, to sort of get a technical role, basically the Matt to the Joe, for me. And just even having that language to say, it's not a normal technician role who support a paintings conservator and a paper conservator. You need someone with AV skills and digital pres. You're looking at a totally different thing. So even then advocating for that within institutions, especially like museums and galleries, who want the masters in cultural heritage communication, the one, go to Melbourne Uni, that's it, you're out. So that's really going to take time to, like, maybe they're not the people we need.
I think, I mean, really what you're both talking about, and what I seem to do all the time is be a broker and be that sort of conduit between people. Because, we spend our lives kind of between this and that, and knowing, building up a whole bag of people that we can call in for whatever it is. And I know years ago when I was on the Board of Arts Training, they would, when we were looking at digital training for film and things like that, they were saying that the computer programs were changing so quickly that there was no point in just learning a system. It was learning how to be adaptive. And I guess that's really one of the things. I think you have to be open to being adaptive, and sort of sometimes feel like your brain is just sitting there and you're shoving stuff in.
It's hard to be adaptive as well in an organisation that's glacial change.
Yes.
And you're saying, I think you have to come back to basic standards, like really basic standards that are not system dependent if possible. Yeah. Because trying to get, like, especially federal, like National Archives, like glacial change, and getting those people to like really come on board, like that's.
And just not assuming that the things that you take for granted, other people take for granted.
People don't. But I think, certainly in my place, it's also important to understand that language of significance and understanding what your intent is with each of these things, which you touched on when you were talking about, and I've heard it before, understanding which of the artists are going to feel that having it presented on that TV is really important, or having that scratchy sound is really important, whereas for another artist it's going to be, well, it's just about the way that it comes through. I mean, and that's what I was trying to get to with that when I was talking about that cookbook. If it was at the library, you'd be just concerned that you would either digitise it and not worry about it, or you'd make sure it was repaired in a way it could be used all the time. Whereas for us, the fact that it's falling apart is actually important, because it shows it was a well-loved book that they just used till it nearly died. So the understanding that context of where and how something's being used, I think, is important.
Okay, great start. I think I could probably leave the three of you talk for the rest of the session.
We should probably actually let other people ask us some questions.
So, audience, do we have any questions? Over there in the corner.
Yeah, so I missed the first part, so I don't know what was covered, but I'm kind of interested in the technical problem of storing some of those artworks. So you mentioned that some of your media came in like on CDs, USB sticks, but that's kind of not the whole story, because those artifacts are part of an ecosystem that can decode them. So they're encoded in some special way, and those file formats are rapidly changing. The programs that decode them are also changing and becoming out of date, and the hardware that is used to run that software is also going out of date. So in my mind, in order to preserve exactly what the artist made, you would need to preserve most of the stack that's built on it. And that seems like a huge challenge.
Yeah, it is. It is a huge challenge. I mean, I really avoided the digital pres stuff because, like, why tell you guys stuff you already know, right? So, just sort of to, like, example of a USB stick. Okay, actually, I'll go further. Example of before I came to work at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. That USB stick was acquired, and it was put in a beautiful archival box with archival foam, and it was put on a shelf, and it was stored in perfect conditions. And nobody ever thought to look at the data.
Conditions for what?
For perfect physical storage conditions.
But for the case.
For the enclosure.
Yeah.
For this physical item.
Yeah.
And then fast forward, and I come along, and the first thing I do is start, going through the data. And there were examples of, like we acquired a Mac Mini with an artist's work on it, but nobody ever booted up the Mac Mini that was now like 8 years old.
Oh God, never.
And it turned out the artwork wasn't on there. It was the artist's home kitchen design and a bootleg Tron. and a bootleg
Tron,
copy of
the movie.
Tron.
No way.
So apart from not having the artwork, we're like breaching copyright. So it was fine, happy ending. The artist, contemporary Australian artist, went, oh, wonder where that went. He's the real thing.
How
So
many
like
years later was it? That's the whole thing.
8.
it was an 8-year-old Mac Mini, but we acquired it about 4 years before. So it was so. I totally hear you. So we go through, rigorous digital preservation activities within our budget. And I'm still very much advocating that the money that you spend on your physical collection store, you need to equally spend on a digital preservation store.
Yep.
We're using terms now like digital collection store. I don't say
That's
digital
great.
storage anymore. I say, the digital collection store. I'm doing LTO backups. When we're acquiring computer-generated work, I'm acquiring the source code now as well. It's slow change. Are we doing exactly what we need to be doing for the future 150 years? Probably not. But it really is baby steps. Like, I guess that example sort of shows.
And it's metadata as well, like trying to get as much metadata as you can and store that with the files as well. As much as you can about your operating system, about...
So for one of those files, right, like if it's a video file, it's going to be encoded in a certain way.
Okay.
But it's not just that encoding. You have to then know exactly what the libraries were that decoded it, because they
Totally.
over time.
But you also could make a normalized copy as well, and then so you make sure that there is access to it. So often we do normalization.
But then
And-
you're re-encoding it.
Yeah, totally. But that's digital preservation. It's about getting the snapshot at that time. This is what was created. And I found when I worked at the National Film and Sound Archive, people were building and designing their own systems to create things as like things you'd never seen before, and trying to document that, or putting in hot fixes. So delivering something to us, then putting it online and putting in all these hot fixes. So what we had wasn't even actually the version. So you just got to do what you can at the time, and then actually sometimes got to archive around it. You've got to take a linear representation of a non-linear thing, because otherwise you've got nothing. Don't even start on computer games. No one's really collecting computer games.
Yeah.
Not even the people who should be collecting computer games.
So anybody like running, a ton of virtual machines with a whole bunch of, because you've got like licensed software problems as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Well, that's why normalizing it.
It's
Totally.
licensed to a point where
But
you
it-
can keep it.
But it's also like, it's not even just the technical information, it's like the infrastructure around that. So for example, our copyright licenses and purchase agreements, we realized when we started doing this project that we never sought specific permission from the artist to migrate it from that USB stick
But don't
onto
you have
the
that
server.
in your legislation around conservation? That's how we get around that. Like if you need to make copies, you don't have legislation that allows you to
so
make
it had to
preservation
be
copies.
for intellectual property with specific artists. We had to write a copyright agreement, and moreover now we've had to write we've written a purchase agreement that specifically says, if you're using third-party proprietary software for this computer-generated artwork, we want the disc image, we want your installation files, we want your raw files, we want the contact details to the third party, we want a 24-hour video render just in case, because we all know in 5 years' time this computer is not going to work and I'm going to have to pay someone, $50K to emulate it if we even can. So it's actually also about basic collection management principles building around that in order to support what we're acquiring, while everybody catches up that we need people like you in institutions.
And it'll take time because it is glacial.
Yeah, it is. And you're just trying to future-proof it as much as you can.
I mean, I go into our basement and I look at these boxes of stuff and think, this has to be dealt with very soon.
And I think what happened is a lot of people, particularly at the library, the AV people, all gone. And then all the AV was just like, I don't know what that is. I'm just going to put that over here. And so when I came in, it's like, I'm an AV archivist, I'll have a look at that. It's like shelves and shelves and shelves of stuff that needs to be
dealt with,
format migrated. And then, now we're starting to look at the obsolete digital carriers just now. But again, it's been a fight for resourcing. So it was just me for a long time. Now I've got Matt working with me now, which is great. But it's still not permanent funding. You're constantly going for funding and and making a case that this is a necessary thing.
I think the hard thing too with institutions is that in general there's been no great growth in funding for years, but we have taken on websites, the digital world has come along, so there's all these new areas of work to be done with the same amount of money, and there's not really, I don't think, ever been a proper acknowledgement that there's this, I don't know how much, percentage growth from both the website and the digital collection side that's just not fully...
And digital's still the other. It's not also accepted. Like, try to have a conversation with your head of collections about encoding. You can't say the word encoding. Like, encoding what? Like, you'll lose them, you know?
It's also storage. Try to have the storage.
So
storage.
Even this morning I was saying we need to talk about our collection, like our digital thing. It's a digital collection. It's not digital storage. I'm going to start using that now.
Yeah.
It's digital.
It's a digital collection
store.
So what I say is the equivalent is you've literally left all the hard drives in the parking lot and it's raining.
Yeah.
And that is my analogy that I give to everyone. And you know what? Is the only thing that works.
There's not enough digital disaster stories yet. There's a lot of good disaster
people
stories
have them,
for
they don't
AV,
want to share
but
them.
no one's, I think maybe we've got a couple more years before people start sharing their digital disaster stories that will get the money bean counter people to actually come to the party and go, well, holy moly, I could lose that. Okay, but right now there's not enough. They need to share the disasters.
People like to keep them quiet and they shouldn't.
Okay. Michael.
I have two questions. Am I allowed to have two, or shall I stick to one?
We'll have one and we'll see how we go, because that might take up the remaining 20
Sorry,
minutes, to be honest.
too much.
A shorter one for Ingrid, which I will now cause a groan by saying is more of a comment. But it was about the intellectual problem you were talking about of focusing on the objects rather than the installation as a whole. And it struck me that that was very, very similar to some conversations I had when I was doing research at the GLAM around archiving theatre material. That yes, they could conserve the props, and they could conserve the scripts, and they could conserve the lighting plan, and in some cases they were conserving the sets, but at that point they weren't thinking about it relationally in order to have a relational understanding of how those physical objects built into a performance. So I know that after I'd had those conversations with them, that they were intending to see what they could do about that, and I'm wondering whether your challenges might have parallels in theatre archiving, and whether there are some synergies there.
Totally. So Pip Lawrenson's seminal paper, you can find it on the Tate's website, I think in 2004, she likens time-based artworks to a musical score. So that's really the work, right? You get the score, it's all, or a play. It's Tom Stoppard's play, but it's directed by various versions. Just because it isn't exactly the first iteration, it doesn't mean it's not a Tom Stoppard play. So it's definitely within that realm. But I guess the difficulty you have in conservation, or perhaps the traditional conservation ethics that play into that, is your allowance of acceptable change, and making sure that you have these artist interviews, really in-depth ones, and how do you envisage your work in 50 years? Okay, so you need the wall. Where is too far? So you're cool if you want everyone to come in from the left, but you're okay if everyone comes in from the right, just in case we don't have the right kind of room, but you're not okay if they come in from the back, and sort of understanding the acceptable change. And there's a fantastic form of documentation that was created by Joanna Phillips of the Guggenheim, who's a time-based art conservator there. It's on the website. If you're interested, you can download it. It's called an iteration report. So we've actively started using that, and this is asking very specific questions. So every time a time-based artwork goes on display now, I complete this kind of report. And really it's like taking away from traditional conservation methodologies of let's look at it up close and see what's wrong to, hey, let's look at the room.
experience? Yeah.
Where's the light coming from? What kind of light is it? Where's the door? You know, where are the people? How are you interacting? And making sure that you can record these decisions every time a work goes on display, so that one, we know the performative relationship, that participatory interaction, but also so we don't stray from artist intent and the parameters of acceptable change.
Do you know what's interesting there? Coming at it from an acquisitions perspective, with working at the Film and Sound Archive, we weren't really necessarily looking at artist intent, and there was a lot of like sound art that we were collecting. It was more about how the Australian public experienced it. So yes, we would talk to the filmmaker or whoever, or the artist, but it's almost like a different discipline, similar problem, but we were looking at things like linear representations of it. So let's get all the things that you've just mentioned, all the little bits around it, the plan, the video, the recording, whatever it is, archive around it, and then do some sort of linear representation so that people have that, because our job is to make sure that we can provide it back to the people. So it's similar, but it's not the same. It's very interesting.
It strikes me that it's not just time-based.
Totally not.
No.
The other key feature is that it's spatially based.
Yep.
And it's the relationship between the two that is essential.
Totally.
I had that experience a few years ago. We were touring an exhibition with all sorts of things in it, and some of it was time-based. And the institution was giving us the information very piecemeal. So first of all, they came and they said, "Oh, you're going to need a subwoofer." And I said, "Oh, okay, so is there a subwoofer that comes with the other parts?" No, you'll have to hire it. And we were going to 7 venues. I'm like, okay, radio. And then a little bit later they said, "Oh, and here's the file for the decal that's a metre in diameter." And I said, "What decal that's a metre in diameter?" "Oh yeah, you've got to create a decal that's a metre in diameter. Here's the file and you'll have to put that on the wall at each location." I'm like, okay. And the information was coming bit by bit up until the week before we installed it the first time. And finally, when I finally got the whole concept, it was a beautiful work, and we could then create it, but we had to figure out how we were going to create this at each venue, and there were a couple we just couldn't, because nearby was another work that was a very quiet contemplative thing, and this thing was booming. And so we had to find sound barriers, which you must come across all the time. But understanding that, you know, there had to be these 2 screens, there had to be a subwoofer, there had to be this big sound, it had to be a dark room. We had to convince all the galleries to paint their room black, which they weren't very happy about because it costs a lot to get back to white from black. But it wasn't, I think these days, all of that would be very clear, and that experience and what it was meant to look like would be there, but it just wasn't.
I guess it depends on the institution and their dedicated staff to determine that.
And whether they have a time-based media conservator.
You guys should all become time-based media conservators. It's really good.
Should we see if there are other questions before I
Sure.
the second one?
This one.
So I'm a technologist. I like technology, and that's what I do. So my question to you is, have you guys looked at virtual reality? Because that, for me, is a really good way to capture immersive experience.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, like, look at the sports match now, you have different angles recording at the same time. Isn't that really trying to achieve some of the artwork?
Yeah, dude, that's such a great idea. I was recently at this conference in Houston, and a time-based art conservator from the Tate, because if anyone who's been to the Tate Modern, they have these south tanks, so the acoustics in there are off the charts, right? And they commissioned this sound piece, and the artist determined the exact points of sound. So, like, how do you record that? You use a VR headset, you input headphones, you physically walk around the space. You squat, you stand, you're a child, you're a tall man, in order to kind of document that, because, you know, you may be able to get the artist back for the next 20 years, but what do you do when, you know, in 70 years, in 100 years' time? So we really haven't started playing with it enough yet, but it's such a great idea. The only catch is, how do I preserve the VR?
That's what I was about to ask you. And then you've just doubled the stuff you have to preserve. Yeah.
But yeah, wild idea though. I like
Triple,
it a lot.
because at 3D cinema, it's triple the size.
Yeah.
It's triple the size.
Yeah. So, and then there's that whole thing we were talking about before about, well, what is the artefact?
Yeah.
You know, is that then, and we were talking about this at my place because we are digitising a lot of glass plate negatives and things, and obviously that digital is not, and you know, we were talking about it saying, well, no, that's not the object, but it is a replication of the object that somehow has to be linked to it.
Well, it's the digital preservation master.
In
my world.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
then, you know, it depends on who you're talking to. And the library has to have this very big conversation about what is a collection item.
Yeah.
Is digitised content, are they collection items? I think yes, but not everybody does.
Well, interestingly, our curator was quite adamant that it wasn't the artefact, and her rationale was, I want to be able to play around with it, and if that becomes an object, then I can't. And I thought, well, you've got a master and you can play around with the other bit. But
so we had a curator say, if something happened to the Cook's Journal or whatever, some colonial thing, if something happened to the original thing, I'd be devastated. I would be absolutely devastated. If something happened to the files, I probably wouldn't be. And I said, yes. But if something happened to the Cook Journal and you didn't have those files,
then
you'd be pretty
really
unhappy.
sad.
So you'd probably value those. So I think there's that philosophical discussion around the object. Yes, come on, you cannot replace that. But if you do a decent job of the digitising of it to a preservation standard, it's a digital preservation master.
And then we have some people who are only interested in the information, so they couldn't give a shit about the original, so long as they can get something.
And that's the whole consumer thing around digital, because the whole thing is people think digital is quick and fast, and it's not, especially for time-based and for AV. It's not. It takes a long time. Yeah. They want to access it quickly, but, you know, like a digital intermediate for a 3D film, but just a regular film, it's a few terabytes. And it's actually, you can't render it. You have to then compress it and then compress it and then compress it. So you have to provide proxies. So people think digital, quick, fast, I'm going to consume that, but it's not. It's not. And they don't like that.
I would challenge that, because for me, as my other major is actually international studies, so I learn about culture. For me, digitalization is how you capture physical objects that will deteriorate with time. Like you think about, you know, the Tower of Pisa. It's going to topple one day, right? You know, the Uluru is, because the weather erosion is not going to be the same like 100 years from now. How do we capture that and then we can pass that on to the next generation?
Do you think that seeing a digital render of Uluru is the same as being there?
No, but if the alternative is not possible, that is the next best thing. Right?
So it's not as good as the original, but it's okay because it's the next best thing.
That's right.
So that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Digital's not as good, but we got it.
I think the next thing is that, yes, the amount of data right now is massive to do, but I think 10 years from now, with the advance of technology, it actually will be manageable. I think it's more important to start capturing it now.
Yeah, that is
totally
that's
it.
$1 million
That's it.
thing.
Because if we don't, we can't wait 10 years.
But you've got to convince somebody who's old school that I can't actually provide access to that right now, but you need to get it in now. And in 10 years' time, it might be beautifully seamless, but they can't. It's short term for a long term thing.
And if you can find the language to say that in 2 minutes in a coffee line, you're totally getting funding.
So, any other questions?
You
We've got two. Okay, this gentleman and that gentleman.
So you're talking about the idea of variable objects when you're like archiving installations. Do you think that it will soon be a better idea to talk about it when it comes to acquiring those as well? So rather than the artist sending over those specific things, that it's more about how, with what the museum has, they can recreate the experience, which is the actual artwork?
Totally. So we do that now. So it really depends. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. So what's important for us to know is, let's say in the past, we've acquired Bill Viola's artwork and these plasma screens, and now we have these plasma screens, we have this video artwork, and nobody thought to ask, hey, yo, Bill, do you like that granular effect? Is that intermittent pixel? Is that integral to your work? Or is that literally just the thing we got off the wall when we got it? And so trying to get that information 10 years later is really difficult, because that's exactly what we want to do. If you turn around and you say, yes, this is the plasma screen, and you got to keep that thing kicking, because if we don't have it, you don't have my work, right, let's do it. But if not, but then we're elevating again what I was saying. We're creating like this collection store of dead equipment. It's like a cemetery for lost equipment.
And you've
And
actually
that
got to
guy-
maintain this. I mean,
the
the
guy
thing is,
that comes
yeah.
and maintains it.
Yeah.
Everybody's got that guy.
That guy,
that
yeah.
comes.
And that guy's like
My
75.
guy is,
And it's
he's
scary.
actually retired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he won't teach anybody else what he's doing, but everybody has that guy, and
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
not going to be around.
and
much
and
longer.
that is the scary part, because I have a lot of that where it's
Yeah.
like, please keep going and find someone younger, because
Yeah.
it's killing me.
Skill set.
You can't
I mean,
go on a course anymore. You used to
No.
be able to go on a course to learn about AV, but you can't do that anymore. There's the people who worked in analog who are now in digital. They're all aging, and the engineers are all aging. It's the obsolescence of those people.
It's the stuff that we have in the traditional. So in the traditional conservation, we call it rare trades.
yeah, red shades.
But I know, again, from when I was in arts training, that there were rare trades already in
Nobody
sound
valued
engineering.
that, right? No one valued the fact that
I
that is
do.
a rare trade. And so trying to say to the bean counters at the National Archives, I need to get this guy who you've never heard of to take 5 pneumatic machines, cannibalize it, do all these, put in new capacitors so we can have one machine that will work for this amount of time. And they go, what?
Yeah.
But that's not capital expenditure, blah, blah, blah. You know, it doesn't fit into the finance stuff. It's just not.
National Archives have, in their disaster manual, they now have some of their digitisation equipment, because it's some of it's so you just can't get it again. That they've realised it's almost more important than some of the other records, because once it's gone,
Yes.
we've got a whole
It
plan
is-
around
yes.
protecting it.
But we're running out of replacement parts.
Yep.
2021, and we're done with analog media replacement. There's no more spare parts for pneumatics, no more Betacams. So the institutions that are really, really slow to take
And
take up.
not only that, PAL, like
PAL, yeah.
NTSC is not a problem. Like in the States, they got a lot of museums that can provide equipment, but for PAL equipment, there's only a few limited number of countries that have it, so it's rarer to get. It's more difficult. And yeah, it's like the earthquake or the tsunami in Japan took out Betacam SP, no more, gone. So all of that analog preservation that we're doing film to analog because, you know, it's kosher, gone.
But you'd
Then
think
you
that would be
say-
enough to convince people, right?
Nah.
It's not. And you sit in a room with the head of the organisation who says, when are you done? And it's kind of what you were saying, when are you done? We might not ever be done, we might not have got it right today, like film particularly, some people say you're not done until every grain is a pixel, so we're at 8K now. That's not enough for some people. It's enough for the person who's paying for the 8K scan, government organisation, but some people, you know, philosophically say that's not enough.
There was another question over there.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to ask about, like, how do you guys think we should approach context, and especially, like, with art, how should we kind of deal with the question of, like, what does the art mean? Because, like, I mean, there's obviously a very postmodern conversation of, like, oh, you know, death of the author could mean whatever you want. But I was kind of wondering, like, at what point, like, should we do anything about it, or, like, and what can we do? Because I know that, like, especially with, like, silent films, there's a lot of films that, like, we've almost entirely preserved, but so much of the context has changed that there are things that it's preserved, but we can't actually understand it at all. Because
You
it's
can't
just
actually
alien,
see.
kind
You
of.
can't see nitrate film projected in Australia. There's nowhere that you can go to see a silent nitrate black and white film projected.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So that was a big thing around artist intent and context was, you know, how you
The
want to
smoky
have
room
that
with the
authenticity.
shaft.
Yeah. So the Sentimental Bloke, we did the restoration of the Sentimental Bloke. It was at the State Theatre. We had someone playing the piano, but it wasn't nitrate. And it's like, oh. So I think there's levels of authenticity there.
And I think it also depends what it means to the artist, and also I think it's important to collaborate with curatorial. You know, traditionally, you know, so I'm taking a lot of license here because traditionally curators look after concept and meaning, and conservators look after materials, and I'm very much aware that my area breaches that. And so you need to be working with, you know, curators who are open to allowing me to sort of step into, you know, their zone. But as a beautiful example of what you were talking about, Bruce Nauman, American artist. His 16mm film collection, he's dead now, so he determined in his final statements that his 16mm film collection had to be shown with 16mm film. But there was a slight sub-clause understanding that, say, in Australia, you know, you can't really show, if you need to show a 6-month showing of his work, you need 2 projection prints because they get all scratched up in 3 months. They cost $15,000 each from Japan. That's probably not feasible. So his little sub-clause is, okay, you can digitize it, but when you show it, you have to have had a recording of the sound of the film projector as it's ticking.
Yeah.
And is that not beautiful?
Yeah.
Is that like...
Yeah.
Again, we're understanding that I want the certain aura of this work to exist, but understanding, just make it sound like it's ticking.
Yeah. But that's what, I mean, and that comes back to understanding what artists' intent is and why you either interview or you get them to put a whole lot of that down.
Yeah.
Because, and I think in Montreal they've done a lot of that as well, where they've recreated works understanding that sound is important, but they couldn't do it using the analog material, but they've recreated the sound of the along with everything else because that's important.
But again, it varies on a case-by-case basis.
Some don't care.
And I guess the issue is for the institution, what if you never asked? And what if they never told you?
That's right.
And that's my fear.